Imagine inheriting just the ultimate mess. Like, paint this picture in your mind for a second.
Oh, this is the good one.
Right. So you're handed the keys to this incredibly expansive, completely chaotic territory. And it was left behind by a visionary who, well, they just unexpectedly died.
And I'm guessing they didn't leave a neat set of instructions behind.
No, not at all. They didn't establish an HR department. There's no clear line of succession. Instead, they leave you a world filled with, like, entirely different cultures, dozens of languages, and this is the worst part, a boardroom full of heavily armed, fiercely competing generals.
Yeah, generals who all firmly believe they alone deserve to be the one in charge.
Exactly. So the question for you, the listener, is how do you govern a world that is simply too large, too diverse, and frankly, too sophisticated to be ruled by sheer force alone?
It's the pinnacle of administrative nightmares, honestly.
It really is. And we're not talking about, like, a messy corporate buyout here. We're talking about the immediate, terrifying aftermath of Alexander the Great.
Right, because Alexander conquered the known world, effectively securing all the prime real estate from Greece to India. But he provided absolutely zero blueprint for how to actually keep the roof from caving in once the conquering stopped.
And that terrifying power vacuum, that's the mission of our deep dive today.
Mm-hmm.
We are exploring the Seleucid Empire.
Which is such a fascinating topic.
It's incredible. So this was one of the massive Hellenistic kingdoms that literally clawed its way out of the wreckage of Alexander's conquests. But we're actually looking at this slice of history through a highly unusual lens today.
Yeah, the source material we're using is definitely unique.
Right. Our sources today are a set of analytical notes that examine this ancient, sprawling empire through a psychological profile. It's a subpersonality framework that the author named Devon.
And applying that framework completely changes how we evaluate historical statecraft. I mean, using a modern psychological profile on a 2,000-year-old empire, it reframes the whole narrative.
It really does.
It takes it from just a dry recitation of dates and battles and turns it into a study of, like, behavioral strategy.
I found the whole Devon framework just fascinating. So the notes describe Devon as a redeemed strategist.
Right.
Meaning this is someone who is fiercely analytical, stoic, disciplined, and just hyper-focused on systems. But the key word there is redeemed.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Right, because this isn't someone who is born perfect. It's someone who has passed through a period of immense darkness or, like, impulsive violence.
Mm-hmm.
And they've deliberately moved past that chaotic action into a mindset of controlled, sustainable architecture.
And that psychological shift mirrors the core thesis of the notes regarding the Seleucid Empire itself.
Oh, absolutely.
The thesis basically argues that the Seleucids did not invent civilization from scratch. I mean, that's a childish myth we often apply to empires, right? That they just spring from the earth with entirely new ideas.
Yeah, like they just showed up with a perfect plan.
Exactly. But what the Seleucids actually did was attempt to perfect civilization, refine it, and most importantly, scale it across an impossibly vast multicultural landscape.
It's like a massive scaling problem.
Right. If earlier empires asked the fundamental survival question, which was, how do we not get conquered, the Seleucids asked a much higher order question.
Which was?
How do we govern a world that is simply too massive to be ruled as a single homogeneous tribe?
So for everyone listening, this deep dive is far more than ancient history. It's basically a masterclass in managing immense, sustained pressure.
It really is.
It's about how to scale complex operations when literally everything is working against you. And it highlights the fatal difference between merely demanding obedience and actually securing human loyalty.
A huge distinction.
So let's start with the absolute wreckage of Alexander's death. The empire we are tracking was founded by a general named Seleucus Nicator.
This was in the years following Alexander's death in 323 BCE.
Right. And when we say this territory was massive, we are talking about a footprint stretching from the eastern Mediterranean straight across Syria and Mesopotamia and reaching deep into Central Asia.
It was huge.
It was a bubbling, chaotic blend. You had Macedonian dynastic origins, Greek elite culture, ancient Near Eastern administrative habits, and incredibly cosmopolitan populations all mashed together.
And we really have to emphasize how fundamentally unromantic this origin story is.
Oh, it's brutal.
It strips away a lot of the mythological veneer we tend to put on history. Like, we prefer our nations and empires to be born from a unified, democratic dream, or some grand philosophical awakening.
Yeah, a nice, clean story.
But the Seleucid state was born from a literal knife fight. It was forged in what historians call the Wars of the Diadochi, the Successor Wars.
Just a total mess.
Right. Alexander's generals didn't sit down at a conference table to partition the world. They spent 4 decades violently tearing each other apart, just using up massive armies in the process.
I mean, it was a generational bloodbath.
Yeah.
These were men who had literally fought shoulder to shoulder under Alexander, and suddenly they're assassinating each other's families and betraying each other on basically an annual basis.
Yeah, and because the empire was birthed in that specific brutal trauma, its identity was never simple. It was never pure.
Right.
It constantly carried the DNA of both the conquerors and the conquered. So you had a Macedonian military elite sitting at the very top of the pyramid.
It's the guys with the spears.
Exactly. But they were ruling from ancient Mesopotamian cities that predated them by millennia, and they were forced to rely on Persian administrative frameworks just to collect taxes.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. But that mixture is what makes the Seleucid project historically revealing. They inherited civilizational complexity, not just empty land.
Looking at the Devon notes, there's this brilliant analogy that captures this whole dynamic perfectly.
Oh, the sous chef one.
Yes. The text compares the Seleucid Empire to a sous chef. So think about Alexander the Great as the visionary celebrity chef. He's the guy who storms into the kitchen, creates a revolutionary menu in a blaze of glory, gets his face on every single magazine cover, throws a massive tantrum, and then abruptly vanishes.
Leaving everyone else to deal with the fallout.
Exactly. The Seleucids were the disciplined sous chefs who were left standing in a smoke-filled kitchen holding a bunch of half-prepped ingredients. And they actually had to keep the kitchen from burning down and get the food out to the customers.
I love that. Because vision is cheap, you know?
Yeah.
But execution is grueling. The celebrity chef gets all the credit, but the sous chef is the one managing the actual heat.
Let's consider a modern equivalent for the listener. Picture a wildly charismatic tech founder.
Oh, yeah, we all know the type.
Right. The kind of person who gets up on stage in a black turtleneck, paints this stunning vision of a disrupted future, raises billions of dollars, and then suddenly steps down or gets forced out.
And they take all the applause with them.
They do, but they leave behind a company that is bleeding cash. Like, they have no functioning HR department, zero compliance protocols, and they're facing 50 active lawsuits.
A total disaster zone.
Exactly. And then a highly disciplined operations manager has to step into that void. They look at this brilliant, terrifying mess,
Right.
and they have to figure out how to make the company functional, profitable, and just capable of surviving until Tuesday.
And that operations manager is the Seleucid Empire.
That is the Devon mindset right there.
It's so true. History consistently rewards founders with statues and applause, just as Seleucus gets the credit for planting the flag. But consolidators are the ones who actually prevent the structural collapse of reality.
They hold the walls up.
Right. Consider the second ruler, Antiochus Soter. He inherited a state that was fractured, totally overextended, and could easily have shattered into a dozen irrelevant kingdoms.
And he had to deal with the Galatians.
Yeah.
Which sounds like an obscure historical footnote, but the mechanics of that conflict are just wild.
Oh, the Galatians were terrifying. These were massive migrating tribes of cultic warriors who had crossed into Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, and were effectively ravaging the countryside.
Just a totally uncontrollable force of destruction.
Exactly. Antiochus, I didn't just have to beat them in a skirmish. He had to break their psychological dominance. And he did this at what became known as the Battle of the Elephants.
I mean, the name alone is incredible.
Right. He utilized Indian war elephants, which the Galatians and their horses had never seen before in their lives. The smell, the noise, the sheer biological shock of these massive beasts, it caused the Galatian cavalry to panic and break formation completely.
It wasn't just brute force. It was tactical leverage.
Precisely. It was a stabilization measure designed to loudly announce that the Seleucid machine would not break under pressure.
That is pure Devon mentality. You know, you take the damage, you assess the field of play, you do not whine about the hand you were dealt, you just restore order and keep moving.
Right.
But keeping that kitchen from burning down requires significantly more than just surviving military encounters. You can't just fight an endless series of defensive battles.
No. Eventually you run out of money or luck.
Exactly. Eventually, you have to build an engine of governance. You have to actually sit down and do some paperwork.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the actual technology the Seleucids used to engineer their world.
And the notes refer to the system as layered governance.
Layered governance.
Yeah. To understand why this was vital, you have to recognize what they chose not to do. They did not attempt to impose a single, rigid, uniform law on every single person from the Mediterranean coast to the Iranian plateau.
Because if they had tried to do that, the whole thing would have detonated immediately, like instantaneously.
Complete and instantaneous rebellion. So instead, this layered governance looked like a brilliant optimization of existing, incredibly diverse systems.
How did it actually work?
Well, at the apex, you had royal authority centered entirely on the Seleucid king. He was the ultimate military commander, the primary founder of cities, and the final guarantor of order.
So the buck stops with him.
Right. But beneath that single point of failure, the empire utilized regional governors operating within satrapies. This was a decentralized administrative system they inherited almost wholesale from the previous masters of the region, the Persian Achaemenid Empire.
Wait, I really want to pause on that for a second. Why keep the Persian system?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does. If you are the new conqueror, isn't your first instinct to rip out the old plumbing and install your own?
Well, only if your ego is bigger than your intellect. The Achaemenid satrapy system was highly effective. A satrap was essentially a regional governor who actually understood the local agricultural cycles, the local languages, and the local elite structures.
Ah, so they knew how things actually worked on the ground.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
collected taxes and maintained local order. The Seleucids realized that attempting to replace thousands of local bureaucrats with Greeks who didn't speak the language or understand the terrain would cause mass starvation.
And a total collapse in revenue, I imagine.
Precisely. So they kept the Persian hardware, but installed Macedonian military oversight at the top to ensure the tax revenue flowed to the center.
Okay, so you have the king, and you have these massive Persian-style regional provinces. What's the next layer down?
Scattered throughout those vast satrapies were networks of newly founded Greek-style cities. These were known as polei.
Place. Got it.
Yeah, these were heavily fortified urban centers operating with a distinctively Hellenistic culture. And finally, alongside those cities, the empire maintained highly negotiated, pragmatic relationships with ancient local priesthoods, temple estates, and rural village networks that had existed for centuries.
Okay, I have to push back here, honestly, because when
Well?
you describe all of those overlapping, completely different systems, Persian satraps, Greek cities, Babylonian temple priests, it sounds less like a brilliant strategy and more like an exhausted manager trying to micromanage a dozen different departments that don't speak to each other.
It sounds chaotic, right?
Yeah. How does this not just collapse under the weight of its own administrative friction?
Well, that is the crucial distinction the Devon notes draw. It would absolutely be micromanagement if the king was trying to dictate the daily operations of every priest in Babylon and every merchant in a Greek polis.
Which he wasn't doing.
Right. Instead, they practiced what the sources call classical optimization. The goal wasn't micromanagement. The goal was creating a framework.
The framework.
Yeah, think about the engineering of it. You do not need the exact same civic law for a Greek olive oil trader in Antioch that you need for a temple priest managing irrigation canals in Mesopotamia.
Right. Their daily lives have nothing in common.
Exactly. What you need is one overarching imperial framework capable of holding all of those different legal and cultural regimes simultaneously without them destroying each other.
Okay, let me test an analogy on you.
Go for it.
It sounds like they built a universal operating system for a computer. The OS itself doesn't do the word processing, and it doesn't play the video games. It just sits underneath everything.
Oh, that's good.
Right. You can run a bunch of completely different, highly specialized apps on top of it. The apps don't need to communicate with each other, and they don't even need to be coded the same way. They just need to adhere to the basic rules of the operating system so the whole computer doesn't crash.
That maps perfectly onto what they were doing. The Seleucid military and tax apparatus was the operating system. The local cultures were the apps.
That makes so much sense.
And their technology, the tools they used to maintain this massive OS, was not some singular miracle machine. We have this bias where we think of technology as an invention, like the steam engine or the silicon chip.
Yeah, a shiny new gadget.
Right. But the Devon profile suggests that in the classical world, technology was heavily rooted in refinement and organizational endurance.
Meaning what exactly?
Their technology was the mastery of siegecraft. It was the ability to establish and supply military logistics over thousands of miles of hostile terrain.
Which is no small feat.
Not at all. It was also the standardization of coinage, meaning a merchant could take a silver coin minted in Syria and trade it seamlessly for goods deep in modern-day Iran. And above all else, their technology was urban planning.
Let's really drill down into the urban planning, because the notes heavily emphasize the founding of cities. We were talking about massive centers like Antioch or Seleucia on the Tigris.
Absolute
And
mess.
the text makes a fascinating claim here. It says these were not just places for people to live, they were administrative nodes. They were machines for organizing.
Yeah, to grasp the classical mindset, you have to understand that civilization becomes truly classical when power moves beyond just a warlord holding a piece of dirt with a spear.
Power has to take civic form.
Exactly. A newly founded city in the Seleucid Empire functioned as a massive societal engine. It organized agricultural taxation from the surrounding countryside. It served as a secure hub for long-distance trade routes.
Like a logistical anchor.
Right. It acted as an impregnable supply depot for the army. And critically, it was an assimilation engine for local elites. By stamping these Greek-style cities across Syria and Mesopotamia, the Seleucids were manufacturing a portable Hellenistic political identity.
I really love that phrase, portable Hellenistic identity. They essentially turned their culture into a franchise model.
They really did.
They could just drop a McDonald's-style Greek city anywhere in the world, complete with the standardized menu of a gymnasium, a theater, and a marketplace.
The franchise model is highly accurate. A city was a physical statement of ideology. It broadcasted the message that order could be reproduced, disciplined, and exported, regardless of the geography.
It's all about repetition.
Exactly. The success of the Seleucids hid entirely inside the discipline of repetition. Supply the army, found the city, standardize the exchange of goods, negotiate loyalties with the local priests, suppress the inevitable revolt, rebuild the walls.
And repeat the cycle.
Repeat the cycle. The notes use a brilliant phrase for this. Paperwork with spears.
Paperwork with spears. It perfectly captures the inherent threat of violence, backing up the bureaucracy. But as incredibly brilliant as this layered, optimized operating system sounds from a macro perspective, we do have to look at the micro level.
Oh yeah, the human element.
Right. What did it actually feel like for a human being living inside this massive machine?
I mean, it felt profoundly fragmented, honestly. The structural reality of the Seleucid world created a completely bifurcated daily experience. You had parallel lives existing mere miles from each other.
And the notes break this down really well. So if you were fortunate enough to live inside one of these franchise Greek-style cities, say you lived in Antioch, you experienced the complete elite Hellenistic package.
The VIP experience.
Yes, you went to the gymnasium to exercise and debate philosophy. You sat in public theaters to watch Greek tragedies. You heard and spoke Greek in the central markets.
We basically lived on an island of highly curated, predictable cultural order.
Exactly. But what if you were part of the vast rural majority?
Well, your reality was completely unrecognizable compared to the elite. You were likely an agricultural laborer, just tethered to the mud, the crops, and the punishing seasonal cycles.
A completely different world.
Completely. Your life was physically brutal, heavily taxed by a distant royal administration you had absolutely no voice in, and shaped entirely by ancient, hyper-local traditions.
So Greek philosophy and imperial architecture meant absolutely nothing to you.
Nothing at all. You could live your entire 80 years on Earth and never lay eyes on the king or a philosopher. To the rural farmer, the empire was simply a heavily armed Macedonian soldier showing up once a year to demand a percentage of your grain.
Okay, if I can play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
When you talk about this portable Hellenistic identity and just dropping these Greek cities onto foreign soil, it sounds an awful lot like straightforward cultural imperialism. Like, wasn't this just a machine designed to erase local cultures and replace them with a supposedly superior Greek model?
It is so easy to view it through that modern lens, but the historical mechanics were slightly more pragmatic and honestly less ideological. The Seleucids simply didn't have the manpower to enforce total cultural erasure, even if they had wanted to.
They just didn't have the numbers.
Right. So instead of forcing everyone to become Greek, they essentially built exclusive VIP lounges, the cities where power and wealth were concentrated.
Oh, I see.
If a local Mesopotamian elite wanted access to royal contracts, global trade, or political influence, they had to learn Greek and adopt the customs of the polis.
So it was a soft coercion.
Exactly. Soft coercion based on ambition rather than a hard coercion based on violence. The local cultures weren't erased, they were just walled off from the levers of imperial power.
Which leads directly into what the notes call the Hellenistic ethical shift.
Yeah.
Explain the mechanics of this shift, because I feel like this is where the ancient history suddenly feels intensely relevant to modern life.
To understand the shift, you have to contrast it with what came before. In earlier, smaller classical societies, for instance, classical Athens a century or two prior, your identity was simple and highly localized.
You were an Athenian, period.
Right. Your entire sense of self, your ethics, and your obligations were neatly bounded by the physical walls of your city and the specific gods your city worshipped.
It was a very tidy worldview.
Very tidy. The philosophical questions you asked were about how to be a good citizen within that specific, tiny geographic footprint. But under the vast, overwhelming umbrella of the Seleucid Empire, that comfortable local certainty just evaporated.
Because the borders of the world suddenly expanded 1,000 miles in every direction.
Precisely. You were no longer just a citizen of a town. You were a microscopic piece of a transcontinental machine. Identity was forced to become mobile, hybrid, and highly strategic.
Which is a huge mental shift.
It is. The fundamental human question shifted away from what are the traditions of my city and became, who am I in a vast, unstable, terrifyingly plural empire? A person might be ethnically from the Levant, worship a local deity at home, but realize they need to speak flawless Greek and adopt Macedonian mannerisms just to secure a government tax contract in the city.
Think about this in the context of your own life today, right? You probably do not live in the exact same small, localized town your grandparents did.
Most people don't.
No. 100 years ago, people knew their neighbors. Everyone generally shared the same baseline cultural assumptions, and your identity was deeply tied to geography. But today, you pull your phone out of your pocket, log onto the global internet, and you are instantly thrust into a massive, borderless, pluralistic space.
It's a very similar dynamic.
You are bombarded with competing ideologies, different linguistic shorthand, and overlapping global cultures. You're constantly forced to strategically self-fashion your identity because the protective local boundaries that used to define reality are just gone.
You have to decide who you are in a digital empire.
Exactly. And operating in a pluralistic, borderless space is psychologically exhausting.
It's completely exhausting.
You are constantly code switching. You have to negotiate which version of yourself you present, depending on which digital city or social media platform you are currently standing in.
Which is exactly why the immense scale of the Seleucid world fostered major philosophical shifts, giving rise to schools of thought like Stoicism and Cynicism.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. When you live in an environment where the external world is a massive, uncontrollable mixture of migrating armies, shifting cultures, and distant kings, you have to find an anchor.
Because you can't control the outside.
Exactly. If you attach your happiness to the external political order, you will be crushed. So you turn inward. Stoicism taught that while you cannot control the chaos of the empire, you can absolutely control your internal reaction to it.
Meaning had to be engineered to survive plurality.
Yes. The Seleucid state itself did not teach philosophy, but its layered, overwhelming complexity created the exact environmental pressure where an individual required intense internal discipline just to cope with the ambiguity of their daily existence.
You essentially had to develop the capacity to carry conflicting truths without mentally dissolving, which, weaving it back to the Devon profile, is the defining trait of a redeemed strategist.
To stand inside a contradiction and remain functional.
Exactly. But the internal psychological pressure of managing that kind of identity must have been staggering. And the wildest part of this story is that the Seleucid Empire didn't have the luxury of just sitting around managing internal identity crises.
Oh, not at all.
They were attempting to govern this sprawling psychological experiment while living in the worst possible neighborhood. They were surrounded by incredibly well-armed neighbors who constantly wanted to tear their walls down.
The geopolitical chessboard the Seleucids operated on was arguably the most volatile and unforgiving in the ancient world.
Setting the scene, where exactly were they?
Well, they sat directly at the center of the Old World crossroads. If you look at a map, to the west, they faced the Mediterranean, the older Greek city-states, and eventually the rising juggernaut of the Roman Republic.
Not a great neighbor to have.
Definitely not. To the south, they bordered the wealthy Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. To the east, they looked out over Persia, the vast steppes of Central Asia, and the borders of India. And to the north, they dealt with Anatolia and various mountain kingdoms.
It is the ultimate curse of being the middle child of geography.
That's a great way to put it.
You are incredibly wealthy because every single major overland trade route has to pass right through your living room, but you are also in a state of permanent anxiety because every single empire around you wants to own that living room.
Yeah, you don't get to sit at the geographic center of human commerce without everyone actively plotting to take your seat. And the threats they faced required entirely different strategic responses.
Let's talk about those threats.
Take their bitter rivalry with the Ptolemaic kingdom down in Egypt. This was essentially a mirror match. Both empires were ruled by Greek Macedonian elites, both utilized Hellenistic military tactics, and both were fighting over the exact same valuable real estate in the Levant.
Which is modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel.
Right. They spent over a century fighting a grueling series of conflicts known as the Syrian Wars. It was a strategic stalemate between two evenly matched, highly disciplined heavyweights constantly probing for a weakness.
But then they faced a completely different paradigm in the East. And this brings up one of the most fascinating specific details in the source notes.
The Chandragupta deal.
Yes, it is the interaction between the founder, Seleucus I, and Chandragupta Maurya, the Emperor of India.
Such a wild moment in history.
It is. So the setup is classic ancient history. Seleucus marches his army eastward, aiming to do what Macedonian generals do: subdue the territory, conquer the frontier, and expand the map.
Typical conqueror stuff.
Right. But instead of fighting a brutal war of attrition to the bitter end, he stops. He analyzes the board, and he strikes a diplomatic deal.
And what a deal it was.
Oh, it was crazy. Seleucus permanently trades away massive, highly valuable Eastern Territories lands covering modern-day Afghanistan and the Indus region, and hands them over to the Mauryan Empire.
Just gives them up.
Gives them up. In exchange, Chandragupta gives him 500 war elephants. Seleucus then turns his army around, marches thousands of miles back west, and uses those exact elephants to win a massive, decisive victory at the Battle of Ipsus.
That decision is just a stunning moment of strategic realism. It perfectly encapsulates the Devon subpersonality.
Let me explore why that is so shocking, though. Giving up land goes against everything we assume an empire inherently wants to do.
It feels counterintuitive.
The entire brand of an empire is that the map must always get bigger. Giving up Afghanistan and the Indus Valley feels like a massive admission of defeat.
And that is precisely why the psychological profile focuses on it. An immature leader, driven by ego and the mythology of being a conqueror, fights for every single inch of dirt out of pure pride.
They can't bear to lose face.
Exactly. They will bankrupt their treasury and bury 100,000 men in the desert just to avoid looking weak. But the redeemed strategist, the mature Devon mindset, sets ego aside and asks a ruthlessly pragmatic question. What actually matters right now?
And Seleucus did the math.
He did the math. He understood that his supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. He realized he could fight a brutal, exhausting, multi-decade war in the East, slowly bleeding out his military resources to hold territory he could barely govern anyway.
Okay.
Or he could trade that peripheral land for an immediate, devastating tactical advantage, 500 elephants, that would allow him to crush his rivals in the West. And the West is where the core of his power and wealth actually resided.
Precision beats pride. I just love the framing of that.
Hmm.
He didn't let his own mythology as a successor of Alexander get in the way of the cold, hard math of survival.
He prioritized the integrity of the core over the vanity of the perimeter. However, we have to note, not every geopolitical threat could be managed with a clever trade and a handshake.
No, definitely not.
The sources detail two other major threats that were far more existential to the survival of the empire. First, you have the slow, grinding threat of the Parthians emerging from the east.
And the notes describe the Parthian approach brilliantly. They didn't just smash the empire overnight in one big battle, they eroded it.
The Parthians were masterclass opportunists. They didn't kick the front door down with a massive, dramatic invasion.
So what did they do?
Instead, they took the house room by room while the Seleucid king was distracted fighting wars in Egypt or Anatolia. They would slowly build a rival power base in the Iranian plateau, peeling off local loyalties and simply outlasting Seleucid control.
Just a slow bleed.
Exactly. It was a gradual, agonizing loss of leverage. And it is vital to recognize that this is how large organizations and empires actually die, not in a single blaze of cinematic glory, but through 1,000 unanswerable cuts and administrative failures.
And then looming in the west, there is Rome, the ultimate geopolitical executioner of the ancient world.
Rome's interaction with the Seleucids is endlessly fascinating because Rome did not actually destroy the Seleucid Empire in a conventional sense.
They didn't wipe them off the map immediately.
Right. The climax of their conflict came at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BCE. The Roman Republic decisively defeated Antiochus III.
And Antiochus III was known as Antiochus the Great, right?
He was, and for good reason. He was a highly competent ruler who had spent decades brilliantly restoring the borders and the prestige of the empire.
Okay, so Rome defeats the greatest king the Seleucids had seen in generations. Why didn't the Romans just march in, plant their flags, and absorb the territory right then and there?
Because the Roman Senate actually understood the administrative nightmare we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Ah, they didn't want that headache.
Exactly. Rome, at that specific time, did not want to absorb the massive, terrifying headache of directly governing the sprawling, chaotic territories of Syria and Mesopotamia. Instead, their strategy was far more insidious and calculated.
What was the treaty called again?
Following the victory at Magnesia, they imposed the Treaty of Apamea. They stripped the Seleucids of their valuable territories in Anatolia. They demanded the surrender of their war elephants and their navy.
So taking away their fangs.
Taking away all their fangs. And, most devastatingly, they imposed crushing financial indemnities, massive multi-generational debts. They intentionally crippled the Seleucid machine.
So they basically bankrupt them.
Yes. They mathematically ensured that the empire could never again generate the capital required to operate as a true peer-level great power. And then, the Romans simply stepped back and watched them slowly decay from the inside.
That is surgically brutal. The notes summarize this tactic with a really chilling thought. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who kills you on the battlefield. It's the one who breaks your economic legs and makes sure you can never recover.
It is the geopolitical equivalent of shattering a marathon runner's kneecaps and then cheerfully telling them they are free to finish the race.
Wow.
But, and this is the crucial pivot in our analysis, while external pressures like the Parthian erosion and Roman indemnities severely weakened the outer walls of the empire, it was a catastrophic internal failure of strategy that actually shattered the foundation.
The fatal fracture. Okay, we are entering a moment in history that requires careful, impartial analysis.
Yes, very important to note.
This specific event touches on deep religious traditions and highly sensitive cultural memory. So we want to be exceptionally clear for the listener. We are examining this event strictly through the cold lens of imperial mechanics and structural failure, exactly as outlined in our source material.
Right. We are not endorsing modern religious viewpoints or taking political sides here.
Exactly. We are just analyzing why a massive state apparatus broke down. So the defining internal crisis of the Seleucid Empire occurred under the rule of a king named Antiochus V Epiphanes.
And to understand why the actions of Antiochus V caused a fatal fracture, we have to look back at the operating system we discussed earlier.
The managed plurality.
Exactly. For over a century, the Seleucids had successfully managed their vast, diverse territory through a policy of pragmatic tolerance. The unwritten contract was simple. As long as the local taxes flowed to the treasury and nobody launched an armed revolt, local priesthoods, temple estates, and regional traditions were generally left entirely alone.
They just let them be.
Yeah. Sometimes they were selectively, softly fused with Greek ideas, but the state did not mandate theological purity. It was a highly successful strategy of managed plurality.
It was a system built on mutual indifference. But Antiochus V decided to rewrite the core code of that operating system.
He did, and it violated every single principle of the redeemed strategist profile. Unlike his predecessors, who actually understood the delicate balance of the framework, Antiochus V attempted to force Hellenization from the top down.
Which is a huge mistake.
Massive mistake. Specifically in Judea, he actively suppressed Jewish religious practices. The state prohibited traditional observances, desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, and attempted to violently impose Greek religious institutions and cultural norms.
So he went way beyond the usual imperial demands.
Way beyond. This was no longer a debate about a tax increase or a border dispute. This was a direct existential assault on the core identity and covenant of a people.
And the result was immediately explosive. This heavy-handed suppression sparked the Maccabean Revolt, led by Judas Maccabeus.
A very famous resistance.
Right. The resistance utilized guerrilla tactics, eventually escalating to full-scale war. And it was remarkably successful. It ultimately resulted in the establishment of a semi-independent Jewish state, the Hasmonean Kingdom, carving a piece right out of the Seleucid domain.
And we must note how historical memory processes this fracture. as our sources detail
No,
impartially.
right.
In Jewish historical and religious memory, Judas Maccabeus is remembered heroically for defending cultural and religious identity against annihilation, which is an event commemorated by the festival of Hanukkah. Conversely, Antiochus V is remembered as a villainous, arrogant persecutor.
But zooming out to the perspective of statecraft and structural analysis, the notes point out something fundamental, right?
Yes, Antiochus V crossed a fatal, unrecoverable line in how power is applied.
The text draws an incredibly powerful distinction here. It marks the exact moment the empire shifted its messaging from "we rule you" to "we redefine you."
That's the breaking point.
I want to translate that into a context you might experience in the modern workplace. Imagine you have a tough boss. This boss comes in, lays down strict rules, sets aggressive sales targets, and says, "I need this grueling project done by Friday. No excuses."
You probably hate it.
You might hate it, you might grumble in the break room, but you will likely sit down and do the work because you are obeying the framework of employment.
Right, it's just business.
But now imagine a different boss. This boss comes in and says, "I don't just want your labor. I demand that you change your core personality to match mine. I want you to adopt my personal philosophy, believe what I believe, and value what I value in your private life, or you are fired."
Oh, you would absolutely rebel against that second boss.
You will rebel because that demand violates a fundamental human boundary, and the Seleucid Empire's fatal flaw in this specific moment was mistaking coercion for legitimacy.
They suffered from a massive illusion of control. They believed that because they possessed overwhelming military power, highly efficient bureaucratic systems, and what they considered to be a superior elite Greek culture, they could simply force assimilation at sword point.
But history says otherwise.
The historical record is crystal clear. You cannot force human identity without explosive, uncontrollable consequences.
I mean, they spent over a century mastering the paperwork. They mastered the logistics of moving spears across deserts. They built incredible, enduring cities and mapped transcontinental trade networks.
But they did all the hard stuff.
But when pushed to the absolute brink, they never found the answer to the most important question of governance. How do you unify a world that fundamentally does not want to be unified?
They proved they could control human behavior through layered administrative systems. But the exact second they demanded an internal shift, like a change of the soul, essentially, the entire imperial structure snapped.
It just broke.
It reveals the ultimate limit of empire. A political framework can absorb near infinite diversity, but only up until the moment it attempts to actively erase that diversity.
And this monumental, tragic failure in leadership leads us directly back to the psychological profile of Devon that framed these notes in the first place.
Because ultimately, this entire historical deep dive isn't really about ancient topography.
No, it's a profound reflection on the nature, the limits, and the responsibilities of power.
The sources view the long arc of the Seleucid Empire as a massive historical mirror for Devon at his best, the mature, actualized version of the psychological profile.
The redeemed strategist.
Exactly. The mature Devon is a figure who has passed through immense darkness, survived chaos and violence, and emerged on the other side as a redeemed strategist.
Unlike the early phase.
Right. The early immature phase of this profile is a lot like Alexander the Great himself. Impulsive, deeply destructive, brilliant but erratic, wielding power like a blunt blade to feed his own ego. But the mature Devon, and by extension, the mature phase of the Seleucid state, learns how to turn that impulsive destruction into controlled, sustainable architecture.
There is a specific line from the text regarding this shift that literally stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
Which one?
The notes say, "Innocence is brittle. Integrated strength lasts longer."
Man, it is a profound, almost uncomfortable concept to wrestle with. We really like to prize innocence, but the Seleucid Empire was not innocent.
Not even a little bit. We established that in the first 10 minutes.
Right. It was forged in the blood, betrayal, and violence of Alexander's successors. It lived and expanded by military force. It was heavily compromised.
But its greatness came from elsewhere.
Yes. Its true greatness, its historical achievement, did not come from being morally pure. It came from attempting to integrate that dark, violent shadow. They tried to take the bloody wreckage of conquest and painstakingly transform it into functioning administration.
They attempted the near impossible.
They attempted to hold deeply conflicting truths. The Greek elite and the ancient rural traditions, the conqueror and the conquered in the exact same space without letting the society dissolve into anarchy.
It perfectly highlights the profound difference between building a fortress and building a framework.
That's a great distinction.
When you feel threatened, building a fortress is the easy, instinctual response. A fortress is just defensive isolation.
Yep.
You build incredibly high walls, you forcefully keep out everyone who is different, and you demand absolute pure ideological conformity from everyone cowering inside.
It feels incredibly safe, but as the quote says, it is brittle.
Exactly. One breach and the whole thing falls. A framework, on the other hand, is entirely different. A framework is an open structure that intentionally allows different, even aggressively opposing elements to coexist, interact, and function together within a shared set of rules.
And engineering a framework is exponentially harder than building a wall.
It is the hardest thing in the world. And think about how this applies to personal strategy for your own life. Think about the effort it takes to hold together your own internal contradictions.
Oh,
You have to balance your fierce ambition with your physical need for rest. You have to negotiate between your cold, logical side and your deeply emotional side. It is incredibly difficult to manage that internal plurality.
it's exhausting.
It is so much easier to just build a personal fortress, to demand pure, simple perfection from yourself, and to demand rigid ideological purity from everyone around you. But that demand for purity is the Antiochus V mistake.
It inevitably leads to internal revolt and burnout.
Yes, holding the tension, acting as an integrated framework for your own complex, messy life, is the significantly harder path. But it is the only path that yields true, lasting strength.
I think that is the ultimate enduring lesson of the Seleucid collapse. Precision is always easier than trust.
Precision is easier than trust.
Wow. You can spend your life building the perfect administrative machine. You can design the flawless spreadsheet. You can have the best logistical supply chains, the most beautifully standardized coinage, the most symmetrically planned franchise days.
You can do all the math perfectly.
Exactly. But if you do not secure human alignment, if you fail to build actual trust with the people operating inside that machine, the system will eventually, inevitably fracture.
The paperwork can't save you forever.
No, it can't. The physical systems, the roads, the walls, the taxes can outlast the belief in the system for a while. Momentum is a powerful force, but they cannot outlast it forever.
So let's synthesize this incredible journey we've been on. You have just explored the mechanics of an ancient empire that successfully scaled civilization across a massive, terrifyingly diverse world.
They really did do the impossible.
They mapped transcontinental trade routes, they built cosmopolitan cities that functioned as sophisticated machines of order, and they successfully held off existential threats from every single point on the compass for centuries.
A monumental achievement.
They did all of that, only to discover the ultimate tragic truth of governance. While power is relatively easy to take if you have enough spears, order is excruciatingly hard to maintain. Loyalty, not territory, is the real war.
And the relevance of that ancient truth to you right now is incredibly direct.
It really is.
Whether you are leading a diverse team at work, whether you are trying to build a new company from the ground up, or whether you are just attempting to organize the complex, competing demands of your own daily life and family, you have to understand that administrative perfection is never enough.
It's just the baseline.
Exactly. You can buy the best organizational software, you can color code your calendar system, you can draft the sharpest, most analytical strategy in the boardroom. But eventually the spreadsheet ends and you have to answer the deeply messy, profoundly human question.
Which is?
Why should all these different parts actually want to stay together?
Which brings us right back to the question we asked at the very beginning. Inheriting the mess. Look closely at the massive systems operating in your own world today.
Just look around.
Look at the multinational companies you buy from, look at your political institutions, look at the sprawling digital communities you log into every day. When the pressure truly mounts, what breaks first?
Is it the borders?
Is it the physical borders and the digital architecture of the system?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the invisible, fragile belief holding it all together?
That's the real question.
And if the belief is already quietly gone, how long can the paperwork and the spears really keep the structure standing?